welcome.
Okay, sorry, I'm a minute too late. Apologies. Wow, there's quite a big group of people.
Okay. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm trying to see who's speaking. Okay, there's Tanya. Okay.
I also okay, so you're highlighted. Amazing. Before we all start with the coaching session and before people are joining, actually today is a big day. Today is the birthday of Ariana. Yes, she is the person behind this coaching for Ukraine, everything. So, and I was thinking that maybe some of you could, turn on your video, your cameras, and we could sing like happy birthday to her. So how about this? Oh, nice. People are showing their faces. She's today, she's on vacation and she will not join today, but I'm sure she will be happy to receive this video. Yeah, so if more people would want to show their videos, then I'm pushing. Yes.
See, there's a photograph of a dog somewhere, so
yeah, I mean,
dog wants to come on.
yes. Nice. More people, more people. So let me know when you're ready to sing. I think it also would be funny if it's unmuted. It will be very difficult to manage too many requirements, but still. So are you ready to unmute and sing? Yes, Lina, are you ready to?
This is gonna be very messy. I love it.
Yes. Okay. Then let's sing in 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mariana. Happy birthday to you.
Nice.
Perfect.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Does anyone do an intro, or do I just go for it?
You can immediately go for it, and maybe we should actually, yeah, we can start now immediately.
Okay,
or you can maybe wait a minute since people are still joining.
Okay, I'll wait.
Mark, where are you joining us from?
So I'm currently based in New York City. So I'm in my apartment in New York.
Oh, nice.
Where is everyone? Where are people generally scattered around?
I imagine. Yes, everybody is very scattered at the moment. I'm in Kiev right now, so it's like the rest of the 99 team, and the rest, some of them are in Kiev, some left. I guess they can answer for themselves. Drop it in the chat or something.
Okay, just interested to know. So let's start. Yeah, let's start. So where should I start from? So this is a really interesting topic, and obviously I'm really interested to hear from you, and I'm sure I've got a lot to learn from you and you from each other. But I have actually spent quite a lot of time putting together materials which we can walk through. It would be helpful if people have got their video on, I always find it's more helpful unless you're really not engaged, but that's fine. But I'll assume that if people don't have their video on, they're doing other work, and this is sort of half part-time for them. Otherwise, yeah, please put your video on. So I'll just give you like a few minutes about myself, and then I've got quite a few slides to walk through, which are quite dense. I would love to be able to talk to you without having to reuse slides, but but I think easier to talk to with slides. So I'm South African. I'm currently living in New York City, where I've been. I've lived for 10 years, and I went back to Cape Town in South Africa for 10 years, and then moved back to New York about a year and a half ago. Primarily two things. One, my kids. Life in South Africa has just been a little bit just concerning about the future. Definitely not like Ukraine, but that was one thing behind at the back of our heads and why we moved. 3 young kids, and then we were very fortunate that my wife managed to get out of the blue, got an offer to join a venture capital firm based in New York and Boston called Founder Collective, which is one of the leading seed stage funds in the US or globally even. So we moved here a while back. I've sort of had a mixed background. So I started off as a lawyer, then started doing deals and investing in early stage opportunities in South Africa. Did my MBA at INSEAD over 20 years ago now. And then since then, I've been partially an operator at large companies like Sony BMG, where I worked on the merger and started the digital group, and then helped start the venture capital group, and ran their digital operations internationally, to helping start a direct-to-consumer messaging business in Africa, and running that for several years, to starting a venture capital platform inside a bank. And then for the last 18 months or so, I've helped set up let me just close my WhatsApp screen here. I've helped set up a VC inside of Endeavor, the global nonprofit, for South Africa. So as I was starting to leave, I got involved with Endeavor, and we set up a VC fund purely focused on South African entrepreneurs, although most of the entrepreneurs really are scaling out of South Africa globally or across different regions, either Africa or the US or Europe. So I spend a lot of time thinking about scaling from a smaller territory to a larger territory. I've also helped set up a fund in Israel a few years ago as a joint venture with the bank that I was at, and a large part of that has also been thinking about how do we leverage and scale out of a small territory to larger territories. So that's what I spend probably 2 to 3 days a week doing, and then the other part I invest in early stage businesses, primarily around health and mental health specifically, and then the other third of my time I spend on coaching. So I've been coaching since 2006. I did a year-long program in coaching, and it's really just been a passion of mine. I've never done it, full-time. I don't profess to be the best coach in the world, but there's a few things that I've learned along the way. I spent 10 years at Harvard Business School coaching some of the faculty, on the faculty there, some of the students and alums and executives coming through that, and I've been involved in the various coaching programs. But right now I tend to spend time when I coach really focused on just a handful of companies where I can get much more involved in the day-to-day understanding of the business. So it's almost like I'm a sort of like a board advisor coach than anything else. Cool. But I'll start off with today. I mean, does anyone? I'm assuming no one's got any questions. I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'd love to know, like on the call, like how many of the businesses on the call are like B2B versus D2C, and assuming you're all relatively early stage, like seed stage businesses. Is that about right? I don't know if anyone can answer on behalf of the group. Mostly B2B.
I think.
Okay. B2C. Okay. Okay, cool. Idea stage. B2B2C, B2B. Okay. B2B. Okay, cool. It's just helpful to know Thanks. So really, I started when Ariane asked me to talk about something. I wasn't quite sure what to talk about. But the immediate thing that came to mind was a book that I've it's a very simple book that I've been obsessed about for like the last 10, 15 years, called Nonviolent Communication. It's a book that was written by Marshall Rosenberg, who was a mediator, a well-known coach, a proponent of nonviolence and peace. And he has some really, really like interesting basic principles which come out of it. But at the same time, when, as I agreed to that, and I thought, well, Ariane, why don't I talk a little bit about that? Not that I'm such an expert in it, but I think the principles are really important. But in the last couple of months, I got involved in a project around governance, specifically funded by Citibank, and Axion, which is the Finclusion investor and nonprofit. And the question was, is there a need for governance training and support for seed stage startups? So it sounds like an incredibly boring and non-relevant title, especially if you're a venture capital investor, But I got really into this project, and we just presented it last week around what really got, and we interviewed about 40 different founders and VCs around the world, from impact investors to for-profit investors to some of the best investors in the world, and came to some interesting conclusions around what governance really means and why it's so important. And I want to talk about that because governance specifically speaks to decision making, good decision making, which is the crux of any decent startup. And it's the thing that will either make or break you. So I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to talk through them, but there's a lot here. So I'm not quite sure how to get people involved as we go through it. But I really would appreciate people interrupting me as much as possible, and asking questions and challenging certain thinking. Before I sort of open the slides, so why I've been sort of obsessed with this idea around nonviolent communication is because it's really around this idea of creating the case for being human at work, and for showing love and empathy at work, especially the word love, which is something that's not really used inside the work environment, although I'll get to that a little bit later. It is something that, that a coach, the key coach to Google's ex-CEO and chairman, Eric Schmidt, used a lot. Then I'll talk a little bit about governance and what governance is at a simple level, then psychological safety, and then some basic tools into nonviolent communication. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's get back in here. Okay. Let me try and open this up here. Can everyone see that? Everyone see that? Okay, great.
Yes.
So the first point around that I wanted to talk about is governance. And for many years, at least the last 10 years, governance has been a dirty word in an industry that worships rule breakers. So why? Because obviously, as you're a startup, you're focused, laser focused on product market fit and go to market and capital raising. So I just want to move this around so I can see what's going on here. There. What's going on here? Sorry, I'm trying to move to the next part of my slide. Oh, there. We talk about innovation, which is ostensibly incongruous with governance, and many VCs don't and accelerators just don't have the capacity to, scale support and even lack skills around governance, what that means. And when I say scale support, most pre-seed seed investors, or many that I know, will maybe have a right to take a board seat, but won't take a board seat. Or if they have an advisory role, just won't have the capacity to give as much as they could. And then a key decision around is that, founders don't know what governance is. They think about it as being compliance, and so they don't embrace it. And then there's this idea around many boards add little value, except until you get a crisis, and it's all about just reporting back. So many accelerators and boards will say, or startups will say, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear your feedback if you've gone that far, has been like, I don't give enough from our board. So, but mostly it's around like a disconnect and a misalignment around like what governance actually is. And all of this around has been like influenced by like the go-go days of like the last 10 years, which unfortunately at the moment have sort of slowed down, and everyone's been, let's just be founder friendly. We don't want to negotiate too hard as a VC, and we want to do everything we can to win a deal. But what came out in the last month or so by Sequoia India, there was a blog, and they wrote around, which essentially said it was in response to quite a few ethical issues that came out and bad decisions that came out of some of their portfolio businesses, not only ethical issues. And so they penned a blog rather that said that it's time for everyone to start thinking about governance, and governance is really something that you have to do like from an early stage. And they, where they went so far is that, they're taking more proactive steps to focus on governance. I'm not going to go into the full detail around that, but we've seen that across many, in many companies. I mean, starting off in, think about Uber and WeWork, to many, new businesses in Africa. There was a business called Flutterwave that raised from Tiger Global at a recent $3 billion plus valuation, and some of the Indian businesses. And so more and more, there's going to be questions around like, what are your governance structures? Like, what do you have around governance? And from our research as well, there's this indication that governance has a premium. So in terms of value, in terms of valuation. So both, there's this idea that good governance makes you more resilient and able to make smart, agile, effective decisions, which is possibly what makes you resilient. And that investors are willing to pay much more when they see good governance, definitely by Series B, but even at Series C and A, they saw it, at least as a negative screen, So if there's poor quality documentation, if there's no good policies, there's no processes, there's bad culture and communication, and there's no alignment or bad alignment across stakeholders, people are finding it more and more difficult to raise capital. So it's become, especially in this market condition, has become really important to try and figure out, like, how do you get your governance right from day one? And so let me just carry on. So, in this new sort of messy VC phase, good governance will be increasingly seen as a value-adding differentiators. So some of like the signals of poor governance, and I want to, maybe I'll get to a little bit later, but some of what governance is not. Well, one part of governance is compliance. But then there's many more parts to governance. And most pre-seed investors in New York that I spoke to, some of the good ones, someone that ran Techstars for many years, and some of the other seed investors that I spoke to, don't think of governance as being a board. They think of governance as being effective decision-making and everything that goes, systems and processes, or people and processes to enable that effective decision-making. So what are the signals of poor governance? If you've got an unclear vision or values, and there's not alignment between those vision and values and how you're implementing them. You don't have like good policies and processes in place, and they don't have to be the most sophisticated policies and processes, but it might very basic, process and policies. You're using vanity KPIs, so you may be measuring the wrong things. That's a clear. You've got no clear decision-making group. So, and a decision-making group doesn't necessarily mean your board. It might mean, how do you who's the group in your business that actually makes decisions? So when you want to make a decision, is it just the CEO? Is there, and how are you influenced in that? Do you have an advisor? Is that advisor a third party, etc.? And then a big one is there's unclear expectations and alignments. So an investor thinks one thing and expecting one thing. For instance, I expect to receive monthly reporting and I don't get it. Or I expect to see, your KPIs put out in a certain way and I don't get it. Or, and it's small little things that lead to poor signals. No external, inadequate investor communication, insufficient or excessive reporting. So often there's like excessive reporting, which is a waste of your time. Lack of regulatory and compliance knowledge, especially in like complex, like B2B fintech businesses. And then when there's toxic cultures, and all of that leads to things like, and this is like the key one that I want to get to, just slow, ineffective decisions. Conflict, poor strategy, inability to scale, unethical or illegal behavior, conflicts of interests, and then ultimately, it slows down your ability to attract investors or maybe even garner a valuation premium. I'm not going to go into this details. So what is governance? So as I said, it's really the simple definition. I mean, there's so many different definitions around this over the many years, and so many codes of conduct. But for early stage businesses, we say, how do you make decisions? And how do you, so that they're both agile and smart and then maybe, so they're effective, potentially, also ethical. But the key ones are they smart decisions and can you make them quickly? And it goes beyond the board around who the decision makers are. So we ask who are the people that advise, influence, challenge, or improve decision making around three core areas. I'm not going to go into this: business strategy, leadership, compliance. And how well does this decision making group, we call this DMG, how well can they make decisions? I'm just going to get into this, sorry. So a key one is like, why is alignment or non-agreement critical? So when we say like alignment, I'm not talking about agreement. So I'm saying like, there has to be alignment around certain expectations. So is the first point. We don't need to agree, but you want to know from like early up front, what is your investor thinking? And what is their expectations around how often you should report or how you should communicate or what your values and your goals are? And a key issue that has come up for me over the many years, over and over again, if not probably the key issue for choosing investors, is around what their expectations are. And this is a communication issue. And often there's an issue around, well, can I ask? Should I ask? Should we get to a clear, it's really a chase to get to your capital. But it's a critical element to try and understand what do they expect from you and for them to understand, what do you expect from them? And then I'll just skip the next one around vision, but then the critical point here is around decision-making for the purpose of what we're talking about here. So, how do you make high quality, high velocity decisions? Do you have a clear framework? So personally, I ask this all the time. What's your framework for making decisions? And I get asked I cannot tell you how much time I see when I sit on a board for later stage businesses is spent wasted by the board or by the just management around how to make a decision. There's no idea around, some people say, oh, we just use a yes, no, we come up with some vague idea. You have a little bit of scenario planning. I actually personally, I got into probability when I was younger, and I like using, and encouraging people to try and use probability scenarios, even very basic probability scenarios, but have some methodology and framework trying to figure out. And then the next critical thing that you have to know in your framework is what's your timeline for the decision. And this is when I'm talking about like decision making. Is it a reversible versus irreversible decision, which is something that Jeff Bezos made famous. And how much information do you need for your decision making? Do you need 70% of the information? Do you need 90%? And then a really, really, really clear framework for saying, who is the decision making group and what happens when you disagree? So I'm currently working on coaching a big public company at the moment, and they have their it's essentially coming out of their innovation group. They're building their new innovation business, and their CFO thinks one thing, that they shouldn't be spending so much money, and this is how they should be going. They should be much leaner. And the head of product and the CEO, the head of product says another thing. It's basically double the budget. But they are they've had this issue for months, and the biggest issue for them is they don't have a framework to say what happens when you disagree. And again, like drawing from Jeff Bezos and many others, it's being able to say what happens when you disagree. Do you have a decision maker, and can you disagree and then commit to that decision? You can maybe revisit that the decision if it's reversible in 3 months' time, but disagree and commit. Then the next critical point to making decisions is you have to be able to make decisions, you need to be able to have some sort of level of trust in your group, or what much more complex term is psychological safety. And I'll get to that now. So that people can actually say what's on their minds without fear of repercussions or of being judged. And so that really helps you to get to the right robust, high quality decision. And then what happens if you face conflict? And this goes back to governance. You can write and all of these policies down in a very sort of brief way. What happens when you have conflict? Do you sort of start inventing a solution along the way? Do you have someone that can come in and mediate it? Is the CEO going to make that choice? Is he or she going to get in and take the hard decisions? So I think you need to be able to have a policy around that and thinking around that, because otherwise I've seen too many companies that fail or just dawdle along because they can't figure out their conflict. And then, what do you do when you see some sort of bad practices or bad actors? Do you have something to deal with that? Or even bad culture going along? What happens when you see that, when there's non-alignment of culture? You've set up your values in a certain way. It's critical to your mission, and what happens when that is not being adhered to? So, and then the last key point that is lacking a lot is having some mechanism, and this is really for founders to make sure they get it, because I don't normally always get it from the investors, honest feedback. How do you have some continual feedback loop to and from your senior management team and your decision-making group? So for instance, let's give you an example. I'm on the board of or actually I'm an observer on a business at the moment, and the CEO has just hasn't been performing. And he thinks he's been doing a fantastic job. And when I think, and he's the founder of the business, he's been doing it for 10 years, the business is not going along, but no one has given him feedback. We're a minority shareholder in that. So you're gonna, if you want to be a leader in the business, you actually are going to have to create these mechanisms and say, how can I be open to a continual feedback loop? What am I going to do to ask for this? So that you're getting and figuring out what your blind spots are, because people don't like to give feedback. It's just the reality. No one likes to tell you, you're not doing something a certain way, or etc. So all of this, really begs the question. You as a founder and as a leader, is are you able to? This all comes down to communication. Are you able to lead in a way that leads to high quality, high velocity decision making? So some of the things that can really threaten decision making is, I'm looking at the time now, is what's called just psychological danger. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. Are you in a climate of, are you in this climate of blaming others? Is there a culture of, which leads to, which is a result of people are fearful of admitting their mistakes, and therefore people don't share their views, and then you just get this sort of the lowest common denominator of decision making. No real hard questions asked. Well, are you going to, and everyone sort of thinks, oh, I must be strong and I must come up with the right answers, etc. Or are you going to have what's termed psychological safety? I wish we were in a room and I could sort of ask everyone how familiar they are with this term, where people are comfortable admitting their mistakes, talking about failure, learning from failure, and openly sharing ideas, which results in better decision making. So this idea around that we can be vulnerable. So all of this probably sounds like really ooey gooey. It's about feelings and it's about needs, but it's at its core, it really is the crux of what differentiates great decision making and great companies from bad companies. So psychological safety, I'm just going to go through what it is. It was a term that was coined by a Harvard professor many years ago, and Google ran a study quite a few years ago as well, trying to figure out what was the most important component that impacted the success of teams across Google, across multiple different factors that they talked about. And they came out with, it was called Project Aristotle, and they asked many questions, and they came out with the conclusion that psychological safety is the most critical factor that leads to long-term success and team success. And what is it? It's a shared belief and feeling that everyone in the team is safe to take risks. So you won't be embarrassed or rejected or punished for speaking up. You'll feel, and he has the word feel, accepted and respected by the group. You can be vulnerable without fear of negative consequences, but not only of negative consequences that you'll not ever raise, or but about your self-image, about your status, so it's actually embracing this idea of who you are, and this idea of interpersonal trust. And so it asks the question, you have to ask yourself the question on a continual basis. Are you cultivating a climate of psychological safety, which is, how does your team act and feel? You have to sort of ask that and try and get feedback on that. Are they feeling, these are certain things that if they feel, are they feeling exhausted? Are meetings feeling exhausting, or are people getting energy from the group and having fun? Is there enthusiasm? Is there jokes? Is there running around? Are people able to be direct and straightforward? Do they feel like they're in a safe space? So a lot, really, really harder to do when you're in a remote environment and everyone's on Zoom. Much harder to do when you're facing, and living in a war zone. But, again, really critical to tap into, how is your team? How are you feeling? And when you when you're working in your team. And so, like, taken me a long time to get there, but really what you get to is, like, it comes down to what's called compassionate communication. And your job as a leader is to find a way to make communication and empathy foundational to governance and management. So, which is really the building blocks of real connections. And, so there's an algorithm potentially, that people have asked, what's the algorithm for doing this? What's the building block around this? Especially when you're dealing with tech people and tech employees and engineers. And I'll come to it now, but I really do believe that the simple algorithm is captured by quite a lot of the simplicity in the nonviolent communication, which I'll get to. So one of the building blocks is, when you're having a conversation, do people take turns? Are we able to establish bonds with each other? Can we be direct and open? Can we be whole? So, let's get to NVC. And, like, I think this was in one of his original, maybe the original books. I didn't see it in the copy that I've currently got. I've given away quite a few copies of the book. But there's a poem by Rumi, the 13th century poet. And that goes like this: out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. So this idea that, we can connect somewhere beyond trying to be right, thinking about who's wrong. And that's really what we're trying to get to with nonviolent communication. How can we use language and communication to strengthen our ability to remain human, even under trying conditions? And if you read the book, or if you've read the book, various dialogues and conversations which Marshall Rosenberg gives. The one is, he talks about, I was going to read it to you, but I think I'd rather you can do that, find that just another time. But he talks about a psychiatrist, I think she was a psychiatrist that was in a concentration camp, feeling really sorry for her SS officer, and trying to really connect to why, and see that he's having a bad day. Meanwhile, she's in the concentration camp. And it's this real, like, focus on how do we remain human, even under the worst conditions. So in its essence, nonviolent communication, or compassion, it's also can be called compassionate communication, is a tool for creating, like, empathy between people, so that when you have a conversation, the real goal is to say, are all of our needs actually met? So there's some sort of form of connection, there's some form of harmony, and foundation for future cooperation. And he uses this term, like, is how we're speaking to each other supportive of life? Which I think is a very powerful concept to ask ourselves. How are we thinking about how we're communicating with each other supportive of life? And I'll get into non-violent communication soon, and then we'll have some time. But there's 3 lessons from the book, The $1 Trillion Coach by Bill Campbell. I was lucky to go to the book launch of this by Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO and chairman of Google, when I was in San Francisco a few years ago. And sort of three key lessons have came out of Bill. So Bill was a coach both at Apple. He was a coach to Eric Schmidt at Google and various other of the executives. And he had this fundamental belief, one, going back to this idea that every business needs a decision maker, not a consensus decision, but always asking what's the best choice. So that echoes a lot around governance. Leadership starts with trust. So that echoes what we talked about around safety and trust, around for psychological safety. And then this idea around, thirdly, that you have to care about your people. And which was really interesting when I'm sitting in the audience at this book launch, was what came out, which I was very surprised about, especially at Google, was this idea that Bill Campbell established this idea that it's okay to love in the workplace. And they said like hugging and saying and using the word love was quite a fundamental part of the way he encouraged people to show up in the workplace. And the reason, and it wasn't just, that's the type of person they said he was, but it also had a fundamental purpose behind it, which was, how do you get people to really trust each other, to feel really safe with each other? And the only way to do that is by showing that you care about themselves, care about them. And that, and he used to, he said when he joined, they said when Bill first joined, he used to attend the Monday morning meetings at Google, the senior executives. And he changed the meetings from that used to start off quite business-like very quickly to having everyone talk for quite a long period of time about their weekend, their families, what they've done, and really establish that deep connection. Which is the fundamental basis for also for nonviolent communication. So just very quickly, when nonviolent communication or compassionate language is absent, it leads to this idea around, this is something that I stole from someone, misery and conflict. You have blaming, you have desert, you have words like, you can't do this, you're not allowed to do this, it's not possible. So all of these things that you deny choice to people. Labels are created, I'm this, you are that. There's threats, there's demands, we must, we have, we should, there's judgments, criticisms, etc. So we want to move away from all of that language, which again, to tie into this idea around governance and good decision making, we want to move away from all of that, because all of that really threatens good decision making. It stops people from speaking up. And we really want to move to an idea, this idea of language as life. And the core of that is empathy. So really trying to understand how other people's are, other people are experiencing. So it's made up of 4 components. I'm going to quickly go through it. So the first one is, actually, wait, should I stop? Let me stop for a little bit. I've talked a lot. Let me take a breather. Does anyone want to ask anything, butt in? There's a lot that I've sort of talked through monologue style. Should I nominate someone who's not on video? Okay, cool. I'll carry on. So yeah, there's 4 key components to, and this is really just the crux of nonviolent communication. And the idea is, can you maybe, and it's an art form, sometimes nonviolent communication is used without actually saying anything, but just through witnessing. But it's made up of 4 components. The first one is just, what are you observing? So before without judging or evaluating, what are you actually seeing or hearing about what's going on that affects your well-being? Okay. Second one is, what are you actually feeling? And it's not something like, I feel you are making me angry. It's actually, what are you actually feeling? And we can get to this. I'm actually come back to this now, but there's a whole list of feelings, which nonviolent communication talks about. There's feelings when your needs are satisfied, and then there's even a longer feeling list here when your needs are not satisfied. So what are your feelings? So when I hear or see X happening, when I hear or see my daughter screaming, I feel frightened. When I hear or see my son crying, I feel this. When I hear or see my co-founder talking to me with in that tone of voice, I feel disappointed, or I feel deflated. So there's a long list there. The key is really to try and identify, and you get better at this over time, but simply like, what's the feeling word that comes after the observation? And then that feeling is connected to a need. So when you're feeling something, it generally means your needs are met or they're not met. So your needs, this could be a positive thing. When I see my daughter laughing, I feel happy because my need for let's see, you can go to the need, you can go making this up as we go along. So my need for connection, acceptance, appreciation, belonging, cooperation is met. So that's an idea of that. And then the last thing is around this is just to establish what's the actual request that comes out of this. Something that's clear, concrete, specific. What do you want that person to do? And it's sort of simply said, would you be willing to do the following? So it's a simple request. And then out of this, there's sort of two components. So the NVC has two components. The one is, on the one side, I express who I am without blaming. So that's on the left side, this idea around expression. And the other is when excuse the typo there, where I'm receiving who you are. So I'm trying to understand what's really going on with you. So the one is really, I'm trying to understand what's going on with me. I'm expressing who I am. When I see this, I feel that because I need this. So, would you be willing to help me in this way? Or, let's just go out of this, or it could be, are you feeling depressed because you need more support, or because you need a hug, whatever? I've actually added an extra component to this. And as a coach, you taught a lot to ask open-ended questions. So a lot of the time, instead of using this empathy, see this one that says empathy, I'll ask an open-ended question around feeling. Because sometimes I don't know what the other person is feeling, and we can guess, but sometimes guessing is not always helpful, especially when someone's crying. Are you crying because your cat is sore, or your toe is sore, or because or because someone near your cat died, or because someone close to you is in hospital, or whatever it might be? So I like to ask, would you like to tell me what you're feeling? So always like having these open-ended questions, what and how, or how are you feeling? Would you like to tell me how you're feeling? Or what need is not being met right now, and how can I help? So I'll just give you an example, and just to finish off, of a client that I currently have, I coach. She's the co-founder of a business. She's the head of product and basically the COO, although they don't currently have a very good decision-making mechanism. There's 3 founders. No one knows who, when someone makes a decision, are they going to keep to it or not? So we've been working on, can you commit to something? Can you disagree and commit sometimes? But one of her biggest issues has been she's a highly emotional person. And often when she presents, she works on these big strategy documents and does a lot of research around them. And when she presents, and after many weeks of thinking, he'll stand up and in the middle interrupt and talk in quite a loud voice, and she'll end up choking up and actually leaving the room to gather her thoughts, and she ends up crying. So we've been working on various different strategies around what she's going to be doing. And so we actually went back to like non-violent communication. And this is just like one little example of what it is, but you realize it's actually quite complex because there's a lot of very deep needs in it. So I spent a lot of time on the non-violent communication, trying to understand like, where does this actually come from for herself when she sees her like what figure does she see? Like actually when someone stands up and interrupts her in a loud voice, who's that figure? And we did a lot of different work more from the level of this expression, when I see this, I feel that. And a lot of it had to do with, it was really helpful because it had to do with going back into her past, and I won't go into the full detail around that. But she worked through different language, and this is not exactly her language, but her observation would have been, when I'm presenting my strategy document and I'm not able to finish my sentence, I see you stand up and hear you speak loudly and ask me a question. So it's like very factual, She's like, instead of saying like, you interrupt me, which she was doing. So it was more around, what does she actually hear and see? So she hears him she hears him talking in a louder voice. And even then we were saying, maybe we shouldn't use the word loudly, maybe just here. But anyway, this is what we got to. And then she had this idea, like she feels panicked, she felt threatened, and she felt deflated. And her need was for some semblance of more peace in her. She needs safety. She needs to feel like she's in control and she's having impact. Go into more detail on those, and we chose not to use all of those, or she chose not to use all of those. And then the simple request was, would you be willing to allow me to finish my presentation next time and then ask questions? And believe it or not, like that took a lot of courage from her to do that, to get to that request. Would you be willing to allow me to finish my presentation in a way that didn't lead to conflict? Because before, when she had asked these questions, there'd been a lot of conflict. Well, we must, it's all about robust debate, and we're here not to be able to, I won't use tiptoe around each other and blah, blah, etc. And, all of those sort of words. But when she expressed her feeling, that especially the word panicked and threatened and deflated, those feelings are pretty powerful. And this need for safety, and that she really wants to have impact. And then if she framed it in a request like that, it sort of has helped put the conversation into a totally different realm, and then the next follow-on would be, it doesn't mean that I don't want to have robust conversation or dialogue, etc., or that I even care that we agree on, or that you agree on, what I'm trying to present around. But I just want to be able to finish my presentation, and so I feel like I can deliver and have the impact that I wanted to have in a safe environment. And so that's one example of it. And the goal, around all of this again was can they make a decision around their strategy document in a agile, effective way? And in this little example, it actually has helped. So yeah, I'm going to stop there. I'll leave it on this page, or maybe I can stop the sharing as well, and we can. What's the time? So we can open it up for any questions or conversation. You can ask anything you want. Okay.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
In your opinion, is there any cultural differences, or this framework could work in all parts of our world? Or should we consider some cultural specifics?
There definitely are cultural, it's a good question. There definitely are like cultural differences. And so I think one has to be mindful of that. But at the same time, needs and feelings, cross, and the need for like empathy, this going back to that quote, everyone, it's the foundational, it's at least should be the foundation of what we're trying to achieve as humans. And so my hope would be that, there's ways to get there. And if you read the book, what's interesting is he gives different dialogues from the concentration camp example, but then he gives his own dialogues where, as an American presenting or helping mediate conflict in a Palestinian territory, to a prisoner, to a woman that's trying to use it when she's about to get raped by an individual, and how it's used really. And the key is not so much the language, the key is like, how can it's the ethos around using this idea around this like language of life. Like, how can I connect with another human being? So how can I connect with what they're feeling and what maybe their needs are? So I didn't give you the other part of the conversation, which was, on the example of the COO, the co-founder that I gave. The other part of the conversation is, how is he feeling? So those are the two parts. The empathy is really around how someone else is feeling. And so that's a core component. So as well. So if it's just all about me, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, etc., that's only really half the equation. So you also really want to try and get into and I sort of didn't really explain that very well, maybe, to try and really get to be able to connect with another person, so that there's a great foundation for future cooperation and good decision making. Then you really want to be able to understand what their needs are that are perhaps not being met and how they're feeling about that. But I would say what's interesting is some languages probably the translation might not be as the same. So you have to look for the meaning, in between, if that makes sense. But it's also, there have been criticisms of nonviolent communication, and where, how do you deal with someone who wants to destroy you? How do you deal with it during a time of war. I mean, very relevant now. You know, it doesn't make sense. It's almost like, but from his point of view, from Marshall Rosenberg's point of view, it's almost like and that's how I see it, to be quite honest. Something very difficult to practice. It's something aspirational. It's something very difficult to practice but it is almost like a spiritual quest for me personally, to be life affirming when I speak with people. And so, can I really listen for what is life affirming on the other person's point of view? So, let's say what that means is, can I remove myself from judgment? Can I remove myself from evaluation? Can I really listen to try and understand with what their true needs and feelings are? And maybe if I do something, I can tell you one thing. If I do that, I'll get further than if I don't. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So Irina, do you want to try yours aloud? I don't know where you are. I see you dived in and gave your, when I have a meeting request for late evenings. Are you there, Irina? No. Is she off? Okay. So then, Natalia, do you want to ask the question? Is it possible to learn NVC tools to look and sound natural? Not to be taken by employees as an actor or liar? I think that's a really good question. The question is, what's your level of intention? You know? So, because if you are intending to use it as a manipulative device, then it's not going to work. If your core intention is really to empathize and connect with the other person, then I think, you know, and I think even explaining the tool to the other person, if you're working with them, is fine. Is that Natalia, what do you, that fear, your fear, tell me about the fear.
My fear that if I wasn't taught in this type of culture to be open and to be empathetic, and if in addition I'm a kind of introvert, and I understand that I need to learn this type of tools to be good director and boss and to be a leader, and it's not quite natural for me. But if I try, I know all the theories about emotional intellect and NVC and other and different theories, and if I try to do it, I will have like stupid look, and I will be not so natural. This is my question, and this is my fear.
And there actually has been like quite a bit written about this, and so the answer, especially around psychological safety as well, and the answer to that is, to cultivate psychological safety, you have to show your vulnerability. You have to be willing yourself as a leader to be vulnerable, and if you can do that, you know, that's the way to that's rule number one almost, you know. So how do you get out of your comfort zone, and how do you find that courage?
Yeah, your advice is it's worth to try.
You have to, I think if you want to create a successful team, actually, in fact, if I know it, if you want to have a successful team, I mean, the research is absolutely clear. Like, psychological safety is by far the number one. It outstrips everything. It's by far the number one component of a successful team. And it's the same. If you want to create an environment where people feel of good decision making, that means that people have to feel safe making making mistakes, talking their mind, communicating openly, being direct, with giving each other's turns, calling people out, all of that stuff. And you're the only person that you have to model that behavior. So, what I like about NVC is that you can actually, it's pretty at a core level. It's an art form, like communication is art, but at its core, you can actually, you have 4 steps. It's so you can have there's an algorithm there that you can, and then there's like a list of words that you can go and look for. So you can practice that before, and it doesn't have to come out the exact same way, but it does help you get attuned to something, and you can try and apply that algorithm in a way. But I think you have to ask yourself, everyone has to ask themselves the question is like, how committed are you, one, to building a successful business? Because if you are, then you have to be committed to building psychological safety in teams. And that team includes your senior management team, and includes your governing body team. It includes asking hard questions always. You have to, if you're going to get an investor, if you want, there's potentially understanding what that investor's expectations are. You need to understand what their needs are. If you're not performing, you need to ask for feedback, how they're feeling. That's all of that stuff is critical. Sophia, you've also got a question.
Yeah, hi. I have a question related to the situations when we can use nonviolent communication with our teams. So according to your experience, when is the best moment, or when is the best situation to use such method?
So just say, can you say that again? You just broke up on my side. All I heard was, when's the best time to use it?
Yeah, when is the best time to use this method, or in which situations we should use it with our teams, for example? Conflict situation or problematic, or when we see something. So when we can use this method, nonviolent communication.
Okay. So one, it's a principle of of communicating. So an easy answer would be to say, like, to think about it always, because to think about how are you communicating in a way that is understanding of how other people are experiencing the situation. For instance, in meetings, it's a question: is everyone getting a turn in meetings to talk their mind? That's saying, that's basically the same thing. Is everyone's needs being met? So it's basically always, but I mean, definitely in conflict situations, definitely where I think you have to ask yourself, like, are we building like a psychologically safe environment for decision making? Like, do people feel safe to speak their mind? And if not, then I think you need to try and elicit from people but it's something that you do, like, always, in a way. It's something that you start meetings with. You're trying to connect with other people at a human level. You're trying to understand, okay, so, how was your weekend? What are you doing? What came out of the weekend? What are the needs that are going on you on a personal level, on a human level? What do you need at work? As a manager, as a founder, as a CEO. So it's always asking, like, are people's needs being met? Really?
Mhm. I see. Another perspective. Understand how to use it in the ordinary life with people who are close to me, for example, with parents, with friends. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you.
I will switch off my video because it can it can make better connection. So yeah, but I was not able to understand when I can use it with my teams, and now I understand that it can be like the beginning of the meeting, just to show an empathy with the help of this method. Yeah, how do you feel? What needs do you have? How are you? And so on and so forth. So thank you for clarifying this.
Yeah. I mean, it's often, I think it's for you to, I like to use the word attuned. So, I'm hoping that, like, it's almost like, you have to ask yourselves, are you attuned yourself as a leader to how others are experiencing their work, their life? Are you attuned? That's something you've got to listen for, that you've got to watch for, you've got to hear for. If you're sitting in a meeting and someone's not speaking, and that's a regular thing, or it's out of, or even it's not a regular, why, how, you need to be attuned to that. So I think at its core, you need to start being attuned to, or make sure that you're attuned to the needs and feelings of others. That's the key part. And the other key is really just trying to really do it in a way where judgment is withheld. I mean, this is really hard. It's like really hard stuff. But it takes a lot of practice. I mean, my one suggestion would be, and I know time's almost is basically up, and Alexa, I know you've got a thing, but my one suggestion would be, like, make sure everyone's read a little bit about psychological safety, that people understand the critical nature of decision making and the two components. Is it a good decision, and is it a decision that's been made in a timely fashion? Is it an agile decision? And then that they read a book on, or read a few pages on nonviolent communication, so that you're all on the same page as a team. You know what's going on, and people can disagree with it. But I think at its core, going back to the other question around, it has to be authentic. And if it's going to be authentic, it means you all need to, so Natalia's point, you all need to, one needs to then be vulnerable and have the courage to be, as a leader, to also model that behavior. Cool. Alexei, quickly, do you want to ask a question? I'm happy to carry on a little bit.
Yeah, probably not a question. So if I get to try, so nonviolent communication is probably not a tool that you pick up like once or twice a day, like using some, like speaking to team members or like with your boss. It's like probably a way of life that you need to commit and probably live with that all the time. Is it correct? Because it's very hard to like just to switch it on and switch it off and like and begin again like an ordinary.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree with that. And it's really difficult to do. He wrote a book about kids, nonviolent communication in children, which I find almost like I can't live it. Like, it's really difficult. And so I don't know how he did it with his kids, but to me, that's why I see it as almost like a spiritual quest, where if you're a follower of, like, if you've read psychology, and if you're a follower of like the humanism movement of like Carl Rogers, where you believe like the key part of anyone's therapeutic recovery is around being connected to another human being and having an honest human connection. That's like a lot of the core to that. So if but that's a mantra, that's the way you live your life. It's this idea that, can you speak a language of life? That's this idea that's supportive of life rather than dismissive and critical of someone else's life. Cool. Great.
Okay, Mark, thank you
Thanks
very
for whoever's
much
still
for.
there. Yeah, thanks for joining me and allowing me to
We really appreciate
talk
your
about this.
participation and your showing up. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. And any questions, welcome to send me a note.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you,
All
Mark.
right.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. See you guys next
Bye.
Wednesday.